another month down, and that means it's time to talk about everything I played in September. I kicked off the month by finishing off the Dead Space remake. The Dead Space series is one of those I've always known about but never really played, mainly because the first game came out way before I was interested in horror games, though in my defense I was like 8 years old at the time. Anyway, when the remake came out and I saw the massively updated graphics, I felt like it was a great time to hop aboard and check it out. When I say that playing this made me want to stay up all night with a 2-liter and not wake up till lunchtime the next day, I mean it. It got its hooks in me hard, and it was pretty much from the first moment. This game has such a strong opening sequence, from that cutscene to the frantic chase to getting your hands on a weapon and taking out your first necromorph. The pacing is just perfect. It's absolutely not a perfect game, but nevertheless, I enjoyed this one a massive amount and crushed it in just a few days, which is a pretty rare occurrence for me. I'll obviously avoid spoilers, but the plot here is a lot of good, with just a touch of bad sprinkled in here and there. That frantic scramble to get back in control is pretty much the entire game, and whilst it did help keep the pacing fast, it did start to wear off towards the end when you feel like you've been rushing for 10 straight hours. The overarching story about the origin of the necromorphs and how the ship fell into chaos is a lot more interesting than the nitty gritty, and the constant tangents about my wife did get pretty old, especially with the very obvious conclusion from the very first second. Still, it never took me out of the game, and I was more so just more interested in some aspects than others, so it's just fine. That said, the final act could do with some tidying up. It makes you feel like you're in the end game for like 2 hours straight, which is all well and good, but that much cortisol just can't be good for me. The gameplay here is a whole lot of fun, if just the teeniest bit repetitive. The weapon variety is really strong, with 7 to choose from and all of them being really good in their own ways, depending on the situation. The rate at which you unlock them is also pretty great, so you're never feeling bored of the same thing for long before you get something new and shiny to play with. I for sure stuck to certain options more than others, especially with the limited upgrade points, but testing them all out kept things fresh and I swapped things in and out a number of times whilst playing. The extracurriculars like stasis, kinesis, and melee are mostly hits. Stasis was always fun as a panic button to literally slow things down and give me time to figure out a plan. Kinesis was always a satisfying option to pin enemies to walls or sling explosives at a group, and melee was quite literally hit or miss. The stomp should be the way to finish off necromorphs you knock to the ground, and in my opinion, should deal a ton of damage if they're crawling and get a bit of a stun lock going, since you're stomping on their head or torso. However, it felt like it was 50-50 on if it would stun and damage them, or seemingly do nothing and let them hit me for free. This was extremely frustrating, especially in critical situations, and it was more so the inconsistency than anything else that was irritating me. Enemy variety is okay, but nothing out of this world. You have your basic necromorphs, a ranged variant, a scorpion, and the babies. For the 10 hours, that's not too bad alongside a few boss battles, but it would have been nice to see a few more variables to keep things fresh, since the constant leg shooting and stomping did get a bit old by the end. Outside of combat, it's mainly exploring the beaten up space station with optional backtracking and side quests. The gameplay isn't much groundbreaking, but it always felt worth it with the extra story or resources you could find, so I did as much as I could to collect everything. The game obviously looks phenomenal, and the lighting really is the star. The dark space station infested with zombie-like creatures is a great setting for a horror game, so nailing the lighting was extremely important, and they did. The dark corridors are great at creating tension, and once shit hits the fan, the light from your torch and weapons always makes every situation feel very intense and intimate. The audio design is also fairly strong. The sound effects are pretty much perfect for enemies and weaponry. I can't tell you a single song from the soundtrack, and the absurd amounts of horror stingers was almost comical. I mean, certain missions, it was like watching an episode of Kitchen Nightmares. Just cool it, man. I get it. You're scary. And one last minor complaint that is honestly probably preference based, but it's my review, so my preference: the heartbeat. It was just thumping in my ears at all times, no matter what was going on. Running around, heartbeat. Combat, heartbeat. Hotel, Trivago. It was just too loud and used far too often. Still, on the whole, I very much enjoyed this and hope they remake the rest of the series, since I've heard that 2 is also great and 3 is a game. Google says no because it didn't sell 1 billion copies in 1 second, but we can still dream. Heroes of the Storm is going to come back. Anyway, all in all, I think it's a must play for any horror game fan, and a very strong 8.5 out of 10. Next up, Outer Wilds and the Echoes of the Eye, and I'm going to cover both of these in the same block since it's easier and I want to. Now, before I say anything, I want to emphasize how much better both of these are if you know literally nothing going in. If you want to know if they're good games, it's a 9.5 for the base game and a 9 for the DLC. They're both phenomenal, and there's nothing quite like either of them. While I'm not going to spoil anything directly, I'll have to spoil at least some things to show the game and talk about different aspects, so consider yourself warned, and let's go. When you come into a game like the Outer Wilds, as so many people gush about it and make essays, you have that question in your head of, is it really as good as they say it is? Yes, it somehow is. The basic premise is that you're a space explorer on your first mission away from home, and about 20 minutes after you wake up, the sun explodes, destroying the entire solar system. Only for you to wake up at the start, with most people around you having no idea what you're talking about. The mission from here is whatever you want it to be, but the ship computer does help guide you to where you need to go by filling in information about different areas as you go and connecting it all together to give you a clearer picture of what's going on and what you need to do to find out the next steps. The story unfolded here is so excellently written, and it needs to be since you're learning everything through text logs found throughout the system. Some of the twists literally made my stomach drop from just a text log, and the full picture is pretty damn beautiful when you step back and look at it. The DLC works as a side story going alongside the main one, but has enough content in it to be about as long, at least as far as playtime is concerned. The stories of the DLC are instead only told with pictures, not words, which turns the base game's formula on its head in a very simple but effective way to make it feel unique. The gameplay is pretty much the same for both the game and the DLC. You start the loop, hopping aboard your ship, and fly around looking for answers. The base game was a cycle of going to a planet and trying to find every single thing there is to learn there. There's never really much of a gameplay challenge aside from the occasional bit of technical flying. It's more so that you need to learn things to progress. Certain areas will be flat out inaccessible until you learn how to get there, and that's an incredibly unique approach to gameplay that very few other games have nailed as well. You technically start the game with everything you need to go out and get the true ending on your very first run, but it's by playing and learning that you figure out exactly what you need to do to get there. It does mean this game is basically unreplayable without intentionally going the long way around, but, and feel free to call me pretentious for saying this, I feel like that makes this game into even more of a treasure. You can only really experience it once, so more so than ever, you need to make sure you make the most of this one, and there's quite a lot of beauty in that. Anyway, to hard pivot to minor criticism, the DLC introduces a stealth mechanic, which kinda sucks. Granted, you can avoid it about 90% of the time if you know what you're doing and time things right, but still, adding a stealth mechanic that actively wastes your time in a game about having limited time is a bit mean. Plus, basically, all of the gameplay of the DLC takes place in the exact same spot, so you end up doing the exact same 3 minutes of gameplay at the start of every loop, which did start to get my nerves after a while. Having the option to start in one of two locations would have been a really nice quality of life addition to the DLC, but I can live with it. Lastly, the game just looks perfect. It has a chosen art style and it sticks to it, making the entire solar system ooze charm wherever you go. Each planet and area has their own distinct look and style, and this not only makes them instantly recognizable, but also comes up in their gameplay on more than one occasion. The music and sound are also pretty much perfect. The cozy song of space flights and the creepy synths of distress beacons and spooky locations all works perfectly to immerse you into this world, or solar system I should say. On that spooky note, this game has some jumps, and I actually jumped in my chair several times when playing, so a big dub for these spook fans, especially as we're coming into October. Jesus Christ, where is time going? While I can totally see why this game isn't for everyone, if you like exploration in games that really make you feel something, it's an absolute must play and well deserving of all of the praise that I'm just going to add on to. Like I said at the start, 9.5 for the base game and a 9 for the DLC. Both well worth all of your time and money. Not all your money, obviously, like the price of them, but you get what I mean. Frostpunk 2 was probably my most anticipated strategy game of the entire year. I absolutely adored the first game, and while this is undoubtedly a technically better game than Frostpunk 1, I just like the first one a whole lot better, and it really comes down to the feelings. Gameplay first is on a much larger scale than the first game, so building cities is no longer individual houses and other buildings, it's instead zones and tiles. No more placing heating hubs in your city to tactically build up areas, instead you just provide enough fuel and heating takes care of itself. It's absolutely more complex a game, but a lot of the detail has been lost in that jump. You don't have to worry about materials and goods to maintain your city and keep people happy. You're no longer building hospitals to treat all of your sick at once before they die or house all your city's children. The new law system is another that's technically an improvement. Every issue has several solutions and each one has pros and cons, so choosing the best one is never easy. Apart from it sometimes is, but I digress. The same goes for the research, and all of this ties into the communities and factions feature where you need to keep everyone happy or risk civil war and protesting. Like I said, it's technically a better game, but it just lacks the source to keep me as engaged. The plot of the story mode is extremely basic and pretty much, "Okay, steward, city's under your control, so don't balls it up and get exiled." The flavor text of people reacting to your laws and other decisions is nice, but because I only ever see my people as a literal number on the screen, I just don't really care as much. In the first game, when someone died, I always felt that guilt, like I could have done something better. Here, it's just one less worker in a city of thousands. The events like the storm on the horizon being relayed to you by a terrified engineer are gone, and instead you have generic messages about civil wars and protests. It's hard to put my finger on, but it just feels a lot more like a game and a lot less like a living, breathing city. The visuals are more of the same, technically better, but just feels worse. Seeing all your people scurrying around your city made it feel alive, and whilst you can do this by zooming into your districts, there's no reason to ever do this outside of the fun. The soundtrack is still really strong and made by the ever-talented Piotr Musial, but it lacks that moment. In Frostpunk 1, towards the end of A New Home, a huge storm is spotted and you're immediately tasked with preparing for its arrival by stockpiling food and coal and completing a bunch of research. Once this happens, the city must survive kicks in, and it's not an exaggeration to say this is one of the best pieces of music ever made for a video game. Scratch that, ever made. You can feel the raw emotion and desperation in every single note, and the pressure this creates when playing is unlike anything I've ever played, before or after. When a storm hits in Frostpunk 2, I mean, sure, the music gets amped up, but these storms are a common occurrence, so the music doesn't bother to go as hard, so neither does the tension. When I first played an hour of Frostpunk 2, I told my friend that I wasn't really enjoying it. Once I put in more time and understood more about how it worked, I came around to thinking the game is good, but just not as good as the first one. Like I keep saying, technically, this is a better game, so if all you care about is technical gameplay, you'll have a great time. But as a narrative, or even just a game that makes you feel anything, it's fallen very, very, very far short of the very, very, very high bar of the original. It's not a bad game, but I'm pretty disappointed in this as a sequel to one of my favourite strategy games of all time. It's a 7 out of 10, and I hope the DLCs can regain some of the sauce. Lastly, I knocked Underdogs VR off my list after having it as my VR exercise game for a very long time. It's a game where you play as a guy piloting a giant mech, fighting other robots in an underground arena somewhere in London. Since it's a VR game, it's obviously a roguelike because how else can they make it last longer than 2 hours? And as such, you're meant to play it a few times before you beat it. The plot is the easiest part to get out of the way since I can explain my thoughts about it in like 10 seconds. You and your bro are fighting your way up the ranks to get into the city, so your bro is protected from a mine invasion from your sister, it's fine, and is adequate motivation for the gameplay. Speaking of which, this is one of the most immersive VR games out there, and it's really down to one decision. Melee combat on the whole in VR kinda stinks, since you hit something and whilst your sword or whatever may stop or even slow down when making contact, your arms in real life obviously don't, resulting in a constant reminder that you're in a VR game. In this, you're the dude piloting the mech, not the mech, so when you swing your arm and hit something, you don't feel anything because why would you? You are not the mech. This small decision makes it so easy to get into while still maintaining satisfying responsive combat. If you want a melee combat game in VR, then this is by far one of the best I've played for immersion. Outside of that, it's melee combat all the way through, so you'll be punching, pinning, and grabbing various robots all day long, and it's a massive amount of fun. It's very fast paced and occasionally hectic, but normally in that good way that makes you feel like you're always scraping by instead of being beaten down for absolutely no reason. The enemy variety is fine for how long the game is, and learning how to beat each one is a pretty simple puzzle that boils down to learning when and where to hit them. I do have quite a gripe with the roguelikeness of the games. It feels utterly unnecessary. In these sorts of games, you're meant to unlock new parts each time to take into future runs, and instead I just saw 90% the exact same gear, the exact same choices every single time, making it feel like replaying the exact same missions over and over again. Speaking of which, those early levels are beyond easy, so felt very unnecessary when you start a new run and have to speed through those extremely easy fights to get back to where you were. The visuals of the game, however, I have pretty much no complaints. It goes for a comic book style to everything, even having comic book style cutscenes, and it all works really well within the limitations of the headset. No use going for hyper realistic when the quest can't do this, so it's a great choice and pays off perfectly. The little touches like the HUD being an actual physical part of your mech is super cool and immerses you even further. The audio is also pretty spot on. Like I said, the game is set in some sort of London-like city, and if you think I'm lying, just listen to the music and voice acting.
Get away from my brain, bitch!
This game is so aggressively British, I feel like it's in danger of being actually ruled by a dude with Cumberland sausages for fingers. Anyway, this game is a blast and a great VR exercise that's also a great game. The number of times I full send emptied the tank like Joe Rogan was popping out behind me was way too high considering how much expensive stuff is in this room.
Boom! Right to the temple. Oh! The speed of Aspinall on display. Let's take one more time.
That right hand was
Boom!
nasty.
Right hand to the temple, rocked him.
Still, I highly recommend giving this one a try for the satisfying gameplay and great art style. 7.5 out of 10. And that was September. As I'm sure you can guess from the multiple space games, the next video I say is going to be about space. It's almost written, so I'm going to need a bit more time for this one. As I said, these videos just kind of come out when they're ready, and I feel like they're they're good enough, because I really like putting my all into these videos, really enjoy it. But I do like making these reviews as well. So, you know, I hope you're enjoying those in the meantime. What have you been playing this month? Have you been playing Who Can Be the Smelliest Dog? Been playing Who Can Rack Up the Most Vet Builds by tuning off his own thumbnail? Is that what you've been doing? In the meantime, thank you for your continued support on this channel. It really does mean the world to me. I love making these videos, and the fact that people seem to enjoy watching them, or if you just hate watching them all, that's kind of strange. But if you are doing that, then it still blows my mind either way. Anyway, that's all for this video, so thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, like the video if you did, love yourself, no matter what, and I'll see you in the next one.